The morning sun cast long shadows across Charleston International Airport as the Johnson family made their way through the gleaming terminal. The autumn air was crisp, and the atmosphere buzzed with the usual weekend travel excitement. David Johnson adjusted his navy blazer while keeping an eye on his two kids, who were excitedly pulling their small carry-on bags behind them. "Dad, look at that huge plane." His daughter Lily pointed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, her eyes wide with wonder. At 12, she had already inherited her father's love for aviation. Her younger brother Anthony, just 8, was more interested in the colorful candy display at a nearby shop. Their mother Lisa walked confidently beside them, her heels clicking against the polished floor. As one of the city's top corporate attorneys, she carried herself with natural grace, though today she was dressed casually in designer jeans and a cream sweater. The family was headed to Martha's Vineyard for a much-needed weekend getaway. "Remember, kids," David smiled, "we're taking the special entrance today." He guided them towards the private aviation section, where fewer travelers ventured. As a leading neurosurgeon who frequently flew to medical conferences, he had invested in private travel to make the most of his limited family time. The kids' eyes lit up as they approached the premium lounge area. The space was elegantly furnished with leather chairs and modern art pieces, a stark contrast to the busy main terminal they'd left behind. A friendly staff member greeted them with a warm smile, recognizing David from his frequent flights. "Good morning, Dr. Johnson. Your usual coffee while you ate?" the young attendant asked, already reaching for David's preferred brew. The family had just settled into the plush seating area when they noticed several curious glances from other travelers. Most were subtle, but a few stares lingered uncomfortably long. Lisa squeezed David's hand gently, a gesture they'd perfected over years of similar situations. They'd taught their children to hold their heads high and let their accomplishments speak louder than any prejudice. Anthony was already engrossed in his handheld game console, while Lily pulled out her latest book about space exploration. The morning light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the private jets parked outside. David checked his watch. They had about 20 minutes before their flight. He watched his family with quiet pride. Lisa reviewing some last-minute emails, Lily lost in her book, and Anthony's face scrunched in concentration over his game. "Would anyone like some breakfast?" David asked, noticing the fresh pastries being laid out at the refreshment counter. Before anyone could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A woman in an expensive-looking outfit was speaking in increasingly loud tones to the lounge attendant, her gestures becoming more animated by the second. David and Lisa exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this script play out before, but this time felt different. The private lounge had always been their peaceful space, their reward for years of hard work and dedication. As the woman's voice grew louder, David took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders, preparing for what was about to unfold. The peaceful morning they'd planned was about to take an unexpected turn, but the Johnsons had faced similar situations before. They knew that sometimes the best response to ignorance was simply being exactly who they were, a successful, loving family going about their day. The woman who had been causing a stir near the entrance was now moving purposefully toward the Johnson family, her designer handbag swinging with each determined step. Her face wore an expression of what she probably thought was righteous concern, but anyone watching could see it for what it really was, pure prejudice wrapped in expensive clothing. "Excuse me," she said loudly, not really excusing herself at all. "I believe there's been some confusion. This is the private aviation lounge." She emphasized each word as if speaking to children, her eyes darting between David and Lisa with barely concealed suspicion. Lisa slowly closed her laptop, her years of courtroom experience helping her maintain perfect composure. David gently touched Anthony's shoulder, signaling him to lower the volume on his game. Lily had already put down her book, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years as she watched the scene unfold. "There's no confusion," David replied calmly, his voice carrying the same steady tone he used when explaining complicated procedures to his medical students. "We're exactly where we need to be." The woman, who would later become known on social media as Airport Karen, pulled herself up to her full height, adjusting her designer scarf with manicured fingers. "I've been using this lounge for years, and I know everyone who regularly flies private from this airport. I've never seen you here before." Several other travelers in the lounge were now watching the interaction with varying degrees of discretion. Some pretended to be absorbed in their phones while stealing glances, while others openly stared at the unfolding drama. "Mom," Anthony whispered, tugging at Lisa's sleeve, "why is that lady being mean?" Lisa wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders, pulling him close. "Some people make wrong assumptions, sweetheart," she said, loud enough for nearby listeners to hear. "But we don't let their limitations become our problem." The woman's face flushed at Lisa's words. "I'm simply trying to maintain the standards of this establishment," she huffed, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to have to speak to management about this. It's about security, you understand." David stood up slowly, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. The expensive watch on his wrist caught the morning light, a gift from his patients after he performed a groundbreaking surgery last year. "Please," he said with a hint of a smile, "do call management. We'll all wait right here." Lily, who had been quietly observing everything, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, isn't that Mr. Thompson over there?" "From the hospital board?" She pointed toward the entrance where, indeed, one of the hospital's board members had just walked in, his face breaking into a broad smile upon seeing David. The woman's fingers tightened around her phone as she watched Mr. Thompson approach their group. Her certainty seemed to waver for the first time, but she had already pressed the lounge service button, and a staff member was heading their way. Lisa pulled out her own phone discreetly, hitting the record button. Years of legal experience had taught her the value of documentation. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage, as if nature itself wanted to ensure every detail of what was about to unfold would be clearly visible to everyone watching. The tension in the private lounge had reached a breaking point. Other travelers were now openly watching the scene, their phones discreetly recording what was quickly becoming a viral moment in the making. The woman's face had turned an interesting shade of red as Mr. Thompson, the hospital board member, approached their group with a warm smile. "David." "What a pleasant surprise," Mr. Thompson called out, his voice carrying across the lounge. "Heading to another conference?" He stopped short when he noticed the tense atmosphere, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. The woman squared her shoulders, still clutching her phone like a shield. "You know these people?" she asked Mr. Thompson, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Know him?" Mr. Thompson chuckled, completely oblivious to her tone. "Dr. Johnson here is the reason our hospital is on the map. His latest surgical technique has been featured in every major medical journal." Lisa continued recording quietly, her lawyer's instincts telling her this would be important later. Anthony had stopped playing his game entirely, pressing closer to his mother's side. Lily sat up straighter, a mix of pride and concern crossing her young face as she watched her father handle the situation. "I've already called security," the woman announced, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "It's protocol, you understand. We can't just have anyone walking in here claiming." "Mom," Lily interrupted, her voice clear and steady. "Isn't that our plane outside? The one with the medical cross symbol?" She pointed through the window at a sleek private jet, its distinctive emblem clearly visible. The woman turned to look, then quickly back to the family, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The lounge attendant who had greeted the Johnsons earlier was now returning with 2 security officers, but his face showed no concern, only barely concealed amusement. "Is there a problem here?" one of the officers asked, his tone professional but friendly. Before anyone could answer, the lounge attendant stepped forward. "Dr. Johnson is one of our most valued clients," he explained, gesturing to the family. "He flies with us at least twice a month for his surgical consultations." The attendant then turned to David. "Your pilot just called, sir. They're ready whenever you are." The woman's phone nearly slipped from her fingers. Other travelers in the lounge had begun whispering among themselves, several shaking their heads in disapproval, not at the Johnsons, but at her. "I think," Lisa said, standing up and smoothing her sweater, "this would be a good teaching moment for our children." She looked directly at the woman. "Would you like to explain to them why you assumed we didn't belong here?" The security officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the situation for what it was. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "David, I'll see you at the board meeting next week. We're still discussing that new neurology wing named after you." Anthony tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we board now? You promised to show me the cockpit before takeoff." His innocent request cut through the tension like a knife, reminding everyone that at the heart of the scene was simply a family trying to enjoy their weekend plans. The private terminal's manager arrived at the scene, his brisk walk suggesting he'd been informed of the situation. He was a tall man in his 50s, wearing a crisp suit and a name badge that read Director of Private Aviation Services. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the lounge. "Dr. Johnson," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I came as soon as I heard there was some confusion about your membership." He turned to face the woman, who was now clutching her designer bag like a lifeline. "Mrs. Wilson, I believe this is the third incident we've had with you this month." The woman's face, already flushed, turned an even deeper shade of red. "I was simply following protocol," she stammered, looking around for support but finding none. "You always tell us to report suspicious." "Suspicious?" Lisa cut in, her voice carrying the same calm authority she used in courtrooms. "I'd be very interested to hear exactly what you found suspicious about our family." She gestured to her phone, still recording. "Please continue." The other travelers in the lounge had given up any pretense of not watching. A young couple nearby was openly shaking their heads in disapproval at the woman's behavior. An elderly gentleman in a business suit stood up and walked over to David. "Doctor," he said, extending his hand, "you performed my wife's surgery last year. You gave her back her life. I'm sorry you and your family are experiencing this nonsense." Anthony, still holding his game console but no longer playing, looked up at his father. "Dad, why did she think we couldn't afford our own plane? Is it because—" His voice trailed off, understanding beginning to dawn in his young eyes. David knelt down to his son's level, aware that everyone could hear them. "Sometimes, buddy, people make judgments based on what they see on the outside. But what matters is who we are on the inside, and what we've worked hard to achieve." The terminal manager cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, I believe it's time we discussed your lounge privileges. This type of behavior does not align with our values as an organization." He gestured toward his office. "If you'll follow me." "But I've been a member here for 15 years. She protested, her voice rising again. "My husband." "Will probably be very interested to hear about this incident," Lisa added calmly, "especially given his position on the city council and their recent diversity initiative." The security officers, who had been standing by quietly, exchanged knowing looks. One of them stepped forward. "Ma'am, please follow the director. We can escort you if necessary." Lily, who had been watching everything with keen interest, suddenly pointed out the window. "Look, they're rolling out the red carpet for our jet." Indeed, the ground crew was preparing their aircraft for departure, the morning sun glinting off its polished surface. The lounge attendant approached with their favorite drinks: hot chocolate for the kids, black coffee for David, and green tea for Lisa. "Your usual order, Dr. Johnson. The pilot says you're clear for takeoff in 15 minutes. As the woman was escorted to the director's office, the atmosphere in the private lounge began to shift. The terminal manager returned quickly, his face showing genuine concern as he approached the Johnson family. "Dr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, please accept my deepest apologies for this unfortunate incident," he said, his sincerity evident in every word. "Your family has been valued members of our private aviation club for years. This type of behavior is completely unacceptable." David nodded graciously while helping Anthony gather his games. "We appreciate your quick response," he said, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Though I think this might be a valuable lesson for our children about handling difficult situations with dignity." The other travelers in the lounge had begun approaching the family one by one. A businesswoman in a sharp suit stepped forward first. "I recorded everything," she said, handing Lisa her business card. "I'm a producer for the local news. If you'd like to share your story, it could help prevent similar incidents." Lily, ever observant, had moved to the window to watch the ground crew prepare their jet. "Mom, Dad, look," she called out excitedly. "They've added the new medical equipment you donated to the cargo hold." The terminal manager's eyes widened. "Ah yes, the portable MRI machine for the rural clinic program. Your father's initiative has been making waves in the medical community," he explained to the children, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's been flying it to remote areas to provide free screenings." Lisa smiled at her husband, remembering why she'd fallen in love with him during their college days. Even then, he'd always talked about using his success to help others. The woman's earlier accusations seemed even more ridiculous now. "Your flight crew asked me to inform you that they've stocked your favorite snacks," the lounge attendant mentioned, pushing a cart of fresh beverages toward them. "And the children's educational pilot program instructor is waiting to give them their usual pre-flight lesson." Anthony's face lit up. "Can we learn about cloud formations today?" he asked eagerly, his earlier distress forgotten in the excitement of their flying classroom. The other passengers in the lounge had formed a sort of supportive barrier around the family, many sharing their own contact information and words of encouragement. An elderly couple approached, the woman touching Lisa's arm gently. "We've been flying private for 30 years, she said, her voice firm. "And we've never been prouder to share this space than we are today, watching how your family handled this situation with such grace." Through the large windows, the morning sun illuminated their private jet, its polished surface gleaming. The medical cross symbol on its tail stood as a testament to Dr. Johnson's commitment to healthcare accessibility, while the ground crew continued their preparations with practiced efficiency. The moment had come for the Johnson family to board their private jet. As they gathered their belongings, the lounge had transformed into a scene vastly different from the tense confrontation earlier. People were taking photos of their jet through the window, particularly focusing on the medical cross symbol that represented Dr. Johnson's flying clinic program. The woman who had caused the scene was visible through the glass walls of the director's office, her shoulders slumped as she signed what appeared to be official documents. Her designer bag sat forgotten on a chair, her earlier confidence completely deflated. "Your jet is ready for boarding, Dr. Johnson," announced the ground crew coordinator, appearing with a tablet in hand. "We've loaded the medical supplies for tomorrow's rural clinic visit, and the weather looks perfect for flying." Lily turned to the other travelers in the lounge, giving a small wave that melted hearts. Anthony, clutching his flight lesson materials, could barely contain his excitement about the cloud formation class awaiting him on board. "Look how the tables have turned," whispered one passenger to another, loud enough for everyone to hear. From being questioned about belonging here to having the most impressive reason to be here. The businesswoman who had offered her card earlier was typing rapidly on her phone. "This is already going viral," she mentioned to Lisa. "The hashtag #PrivateJetJustice is trending locally. Your family's dignity in the face of prejudice is inspiring people." David checked his watch, a gift from a grateful patient's family, and smiled at his wife. "Ready for our weekend getaway?" he asked, though they both knew this incident would lead to important conversations with their children later. As they walked toward the boarding area, other travelers stood in respect. The elderly couple who had shown their support earlier raised their coffee cups in a stubborn salute. The lounge attendant hurried after them with a basket of fresh pastries for the children's flight. Through the terminal's windows, they could see their pilot and co-pilot completing their pre-flight checks. The sun caught the jet's polished surface, creating an almost ethereal glow around the aircraft. The medical cross symbol seemed to shine especially bright, as if highlighting the contrast between Dr. Johnson's life-saving work and the baseless assumptions they'd faced moments ago. "Mom," Lily whispered as they walked down the private terminal's corridor, "I'm proud of how you and Dad handled that. You didn't let her make you angry." "Sometimes the best response to ignorance is success," Lisa replied, adjusting her daughter's backpack strap. "And helping others, just like your father does with this plane." The ground crew had lined up alongside their jet, creating an impromptu honor guard. Each member stood tall, showing their respect for the family that had maintained their dignity through the entire incident. The red carpet leading to the jet's stairs seemed to symbolize not just luxury, but the recognition of true class, the kind that comes from character, not assumptions. As their private jet climbed into the clear blue sky, the Johnson family settled into their luxurious cabin. The children were in the front section with their flight instructor, eagerly learning about cloud formations, while David and Lisa sat in the main cabin, finally having a moment to process the morning's events. "Should we talk about what happened?" Lisa asked softly, looking out at the clouds they were ascending through. The ground below was getting smaller, making the airport drama seem distant already. David took her hand, his doctor's fingers gentle against her palm. "I think we handled it the best way possible," by letting our success speak for itself. He paused, watching a flight attendant arrange their breakfast. But yes, we should talk to the kids. In the front cabin, they could hear Anthony's excited voice asking questions about cumulus clouds, while Lily was sketching the various formations in her notebook. The flight instructor's voice was warm and encouraging, turning the earlier incident into nothing more than a distant memory for the children. "Your phone's been buzzing," David noted, gesturing to Lisa's bag. "The video must be spreading." Lisa pulled out her phone to find hundreds of notifications. The clip of the incident had indeed gone viral, but not in the way such videos usually did. Instead of anger and outrage, the comments were filled with admiration for their family's composure and revelations about Dr. Johnson's flying medical clinic program. "Dad, Mom," Lily called out, running back to their cabin. "Look what I learned about weather patterns." She stopped short, noticing her parents' thoughtful expressions. "Are you still thinking about that mean lady?" "Come here, sweetheart." Lisa patted the seat beside her. Anthony, hearing his sister's voice, joined them too. "We want to talk about what happened this morning." "You know, kids," David began, his voice gentle but firm, "some people make judgments without knowing the whole story. But what matters isn't proving them wrong, it's continuing to do what's right." "Like your flying doctor program?" Anthony asked, his young face serious. "You help people who can't come to the big hospitals." "Exactly," Lisa smiled, smoothing her son's hair. "Success isn't just about having nice things like this plane. It's about using what we have to make a difference." Through the window, they could see their jet's shadow moving across the clouds below. The medical cross symbol would soon be landing at another rural clinic, bringing hope and healing to those in need. "The real victory today wasn't showing that lady she was wrong," David said, watching his children's faces carefully. "It was showing her and everyone else what really matters, how we treat others and use our blessings to help people." The flight attendant appeared with hot chocolate for the children and coffee for the parents. "We'll be landing at Martha's Vineyard in about an hour," she announced with a warm smile. "And Dr. Johnson, the rural clinic called. They're excited about tomorrow's visit." As their jet soared through the pristine sky, the Johnson family held each other close, their bond stronger than any prejudice they might face. Below them, their story was spreading, not as a tale of confrontation, but as an inspiration about rising above ignorance with grace, dignity, and purpose.